Imagine following a strict, heart-healthy diet, right?
Okay.
The exact one recommended by top doctors for your entire adult life,
Right.
only to find out that it actually increased your risk of a heart attack by like 69%.
I mean, and then imagine if the data proving that danger was actively hidden from the public just because it didn't fit the nutritional narrative we've all been sold for the last 50 years.
Yeah, that is exactly the kind of paradigm-shattering reality that we are digging into today. Welcome to the Deep Dive.
Glad to be here.
So our mission today is to explore this really eye-opening discussion from the Primal Podcast. It features Professor Tim Noakes, who is, world-renowned physician and researcher.
Absolutely.
And for decades, we've been told that carbohydrates are the essential fuel for human energy. Like you need them for athletic performance. But the research we're looking at today suggests the exact opposite might be true.
Yeah, that we're basically fueling our bodies with the biological equivalent of toxic waste.
Which is just a massive claim.
It is a massive claim, and we're going to really synthesize the science behind it today. We want to look closely at Professor Noakes' own pretty dramatic health transformation, the systemic forces that have pushed carbs onto our plates, and this groundbreaking 2026 study.
Oh, that study is wild.
It really is. It's frankly forcing us to rewrite sports nutrition textbooks. So we want to get past the generic advice for you and really understand the biological mechanisms at play here.
Yeah, and to really grasp how upside down our modern diet is, I think we have to start with how we are actually built. Like evolutionarily speaking.
Right.
Because human beings didn't evolve eating bowls of oatmeal, or plates of pasta.
No, not at all.
For millions of years, we ran on fat and meat.
That is such a critical baseline to establish. That dense nutrition from animal fat is quite literally what fueled the rapid evolutionary development of our abnormally large brains.
Wow.
Yeah. And if you look back through historical diets, grains were largely considered, peasant food.
Peasant food.
Yeah. Those who had wealth and choice, they ate meat. The massive systemic shift we experience today is actually incredibly recent. It really started in earnest around 1977.
And that wasn't because someone discovered a biological need for more bread, right?
Yeah.
It was purely industry-driven.
Entirely. So the U.S. dietary guidelines changed due to just intense pressure from the grain industry and the massive industrialization of crops like maize or corn.
Because it's cheap.
Right. It became cheap to produce and highly profitable. To give you an idea of the scale of this shift, in places like South Africa today, a staggering 45% of all dietary calories consumed come from maize alone.
45%. That is just wild when you think about it.
It's massive.
It's like we've taken a luxury sports car,
right,
one built to run on premium diesel, and for the last 50 years, we've just been forcing it to run on cheap, unleaded gas because a lobbyist said it was a good idea.
That is exactly what we've done.
But I have to push back a little here because we hear this constantly. What about the quote-unquote good carbs? I get that a donut is bad, obviously, but surely a slice of wholemeal bread or a fresh apple is perfectly healthy because of the fiber.
So this is one of the most persistent myths, and Professor Noakes takes a very absolute stance on it based on the metabolic data.
Okay.
If you were someone with severe insulin resistance, which, by the way, is a massive portion of the modern population today,
Right.
To your body, one slice of wholemeal bread and an apple are virtually identical.
Wait, I'm struggling with this. An apple and a slice of bread are the same? How is that even possible?
Well, it comes down to the cellular mechanism. Think of insulin like a bouncer at a nightclub.
Okay, a bouncer.
Yeah. And the glucose from your food are the guests trying to get in. In a completely healthy body, the door's open, glucose goes into the cells for energy, everyone is happy.
Makes sense.
But if you are insulin resistant, your nightclub is completely full. The cells are stuffed, so the pancreas has to pump out more and more insulin-like. The bouncer has to shove harder and harder just to force a tiny little bit of glucose inside.
Okay, that visual actually makes a lot of sense.
So when you eat that wholemeal bread or that apple, they both just break down into pure glucose in your bloodstream.
Right.
Your body doesn't care about the source. That glucose requires a massive surge of insulin to clear it, which only exacerbates the insulin resistance.
Even with the fiber?
Even with the fiber. The fiber in the apple might slow the line at the nightclub slightly, but the overwhelming burden on your pancreas and your fat storage is exactly the same.
Wow. Okay, so if the biology is that clear, if insulin is the primary hormone making us store fat and driving this whole metabolic crisis,
Right.
It begs a massive question.
Go ahead.
How did an entire medical establishment filled with brilliant people look at the human body and decide that calorie counting and running on a treadmill was the answer?
That's a great question.
Why are doctors still prescribing the exact opposite of what the biology dictates?
To understand that massive blind spot, you really have to look at the intersection of medical history and industry. The research highlights that the medical profession is deeply intertwined with the pharmaceutical industry.
Right, of course.
The entire system is built to reward the prescription of medications to treat symptoms rather than uncovering and treating root causes.
And it starts in medical school, doesn't it? Like the way doctors are actually trained to think from day one.
Exactly. Medical training heavily relies on eidetic or photographic memory. Doctors are essentially trained to match a specific list of symptoms to a textbook treatment.
It's just rote memorization.
Right. They aren't necessarily rewarded for creativity, critical thinking, or questioning the established norm. If the textbook says, prescribe this for high blood sugar, that is what they do.
And that rigid thinking has deep historical roots too, particularly when you look at the discovery of insulin itself.
Yes. The history of insulin is incredibly telling here. It was discovered in 1921, and at the time, it was an absolute miracle.
Because before 1921, children with type 1 diabetes,
Yeah, whose bodies couldn't produce any insulin at all.
right, they would just die of ketoacidosis.
And just to clarify for everyone listening, ketoacidosis is when the body can't process sugar without insulin, so the blood turns dangerously acidic, right?
Correct. It was fatal.
Yeah.
So this injected insulin totally saved their lives.
Amazing.
But almost immediately, doctors noticed a really troubling side effect. These patients ballooned in weight.
Wow.
And it wasn't just aesthetic. By the 1930s and 40s, prestigious clinics, like the famous Joslin clinics, were documenting that 15 to 20 years of insulin therapy consistently led to severe coronary artery disease.
So they were watching a life-saving treatment cause massive long-term damage in real time.
Yeah.
How did they justify that?
This is where the historian Gary Taubes provides some brilliant insight. Early doctors simply didn't want to admit that this miraculous life-saving drug had devastating side effects.
Oh, wow. Cognitive dissonance.
Pure cognitive dissonance. So
Right.
instead of blaming the insulin for the weight gain and the heart disease, they blamed the patients.
You're kidding.
No. They essentially said the insulin is just making you eat too much. You lack willpower. It's your fault.
Wow. So the whole stigma that obesity is a moral failing or just a lack of calorie control was literally invented to cover up the side effects of early medical treatments.
Precisely. That stigma was born right there, and it persists in almost every doctor's office today.
That is unbelievable. And it's interesting seeing this medical friction spill over into the mainstream now, too.
Yeah.
The source mentions that public figures like Robert Kennedy in the U.S. are actively pushing back against these established dietary guidelines and pharma norms.
Right. And we should be clear, regardless of anyone's politics, we are just reporting what the source highlights here. We aren't endorsing any specific political viewpoint.
Exactly, completely impartial on that front.
Yeah.
But it really just highlights how fractured the public consensus has become around what actually constitutes a healthy diet.
It absolutely does. The established narrative is definitely cracking.
And perhaps the most compelling crack in that narrative is Professor Noakes himself.
Oh, his story is wild.
Right, because he wasn't some fringe outsider. He was a highly respected medical professional, a top-tier researcher in sports science, and he completely bought into the carbohydrate narrative.
He literally wrote the book on it, didn't he?
He did, until he hit a wall. His personal awakening is just a perfect case study in the power of this biological mismatch.
So what happened?
In December 2010, Noakes, who was an avid marathon runner, went for a routine run. He had a tiny hill, and his heart rate skyrocketed to 150 beats per minute.
Wait, 150 on a tiny hill?
Yeah, he felt absolutely dreadful.
Which for a guy running 120 kilometers awake, a heart rate of 150 on a small hill is a massive warning sign.
It's terrifying. So he went home, opened his computer, and by sheer coincidence, saw an advertisement for a book.
What book?
The New Atkins for a New You by Jeff Volek.
Oh, man. Knowing his background, he must have hated that. I mean, the Atkins diet was the ultimate enemy of the high-carb sports science world.
He was furious. He thought the diet was dangerous nonsense. But to his credit as a scientist, he bought the book to prove it wrong.
Okay, that takes some intellectual honesty.
Right. Instead, he read the 150 peer-reviewed references inside and had a horrifying realization. His entire medical paradigm was backwards.
Oh, my God.
By lunchtime that very same day, he completely abandoned carbohydrates and switched to a meat-based, high-fat diet.
That is just the irony of a top doctor having to accidentally discover a life-saving diet in a commercial book ad.
Right.
But the physical results were instantaneous, weren't they?
They were undeniable. Within days, he felt better. The weight began to drop off. His running pace reverted to what it had been 20 years prior.
Incredible.
He took his own blood work and realized he had been diabetic and that this sudden dietary shift had already begun reversing it.
Wow.
He eventually co-authored a book called The Real Meal Revolution, which helped countless readers reverse their own type 2 diabetes by following his exact protocol.
But the medical establishment doesn't just applaud when one of their own goes rogue and proves them wrong, do they? The backlash he faced was staggering.
It really was a concerted effort to silence him. He lost his research funding from a major medical insurance company, a company that, unsurprisingly, heavily promoted a grain-based, low-fat diet.
Of course.
But the real climax was when a dietitian reported him to the Health Professions Council over a single tweet.
A tweet? Are you serious?
A single tweet. He had given general low-carb dietary advice to a mother online.
A 4-year trial over a tweet.
4 years. He spent 28 days in court defending his medical license against the establishment.
That sounds exhausting.
But he won. He won by presenting hard, unassailable biological science. And in doing so, he protected the right of doctors to speak directly to the public and challenge the dietary status quo without fear of losing their livelihoods.
What I find most fascinating about his personal story is the blood work he took right before he switched his diet.
Oh, yeah.
He was running marathons, training endlessly, yet his fasting insulin levels were 5 times the normal limit.
It's crazy.
It completely destroys the myth that you can just burn off a bad diet.
You cannot out-exercise a broken diet, period. And winning that trial allowed Noakes to get back into the lab, which leads us directly to the science that proves exactly why that is.
Right.
His 2026 study, published in the American Journal of Physiology, fundamentally dismantles the long-standing quote-unquote carb-loading myth in sports.
This is the study that won Best Impact Paper of 2025, right?
Yes.
And remarkably, they pulled this off with 0 massive NIH funding. It was just a small team. Noakes, Jeff Volek, Dominic D'Agostino, and Philip Prince taking on the giants of the sports nutrition industry.
And their methodology was incredibly rigorous. They took highly trained athletes and put them through a brutal testing protocol. A 5-kilometer time trial, a 1-mile race, and extremely demanding 6 by 800 meter intervals on a treadmill.
Sounds brutal.
Yeah. And they compared athletes strictly adapted to a high-fat, low-carb diet against those on a traditional high-carb diet.
Okay, because we've all seen athletes pounding pasta the night before a big race, terrified of bonking or running out of glycogen. So what was the difference in performance?
Zero.
Zero.
Absolutely identical performance across the board.
Which is crazy enough, but it's the metabolic data underneath that performance that actually broke the textbook rules.
Exactly. On the high-fat diet, these athletes burned fat at 86% of their maximum effort. Now, if you read a standard physiology textbook today, it will state as absolute fact that fat oxidation is biologically impossible above 85% effort.
Wow.
They proved the textbook's wrong.
Okay, so if the textbook is wrong, how is the body actually processing this energy, like mechanically?
To explain this, Noakes formalized what he calls the 2 glucose pools theory. This is the physiological mechanism you really need to visualize here.
Okay, 2 pools.
Imagine your body has 2 separate tanks for storing carbohydrates. The first is the large pool, which is the glycogen stored in your muscles. It holds a massive amount, up to 800 grams of carbohydrates.
And for decades, sports scientists thought this muscle glycogen was like the primary jet fuel for exercise.
Right, but Noakes argues its real evolutionary job is completely different. Think of the blood sugar in your body like a toxic spill in a factory.
A toxic spill.
Okay.
Yeah.
The small pool, which is the glucose in your liver and bloodstream, is the clean drinking water for the factory boss, your brain. Its only job is to keep the brain fueled and stable.
Okay, so what is the massive muscle pool for then?
The large pool in your muscles isn't an energy reserve. It's a giant hazardous waste bin. It acts as a sump.
A sump.
Right. When you consume excess toxic levels of sugar, insulin's primary job isn't to feed your muscles. It's a desperate cleanup crew shoving that toxic sugar out of the bloodstream and into that muscle bin so it doesn't kill you.
That completely flips the paradigm.
Totally. The level of glycogen sitting in that large muscle pool is actually what dictates your fasting insulin level.
So if that hazardous waste bin is constantly full, your body has to keep the cleanup crew, the insulin, working overtime chronically just to manage the overflow.
Precisely. Now, they tested this in the study to see which tank actually mattered for the athletes. They found that what you eat before a workout, trying to fill up that large muscle tank with pasta, has absolutely 0 impact on performance. But if you take just 10 to 20 grams of carbs, think a small handful of blueberries during the intense exercise, performance actually improved by 20%.
Wait, just a tiny handful during the run? Why?
Because that tiny amount of carbs protects the small pool. It keeps the blood sugar stable for the brain. It tells the brain you're safe, keep pushing. It has absolutely nothing to do with needing massive glycogen stores in the muscles.
Okay, but let's bring this back to reality for the listener.
Okay.
Because elite athletes running brutal intervals is one thing. But if they don't even need carbs before a workout, what does this mean for the average person who sits at a desk, commutes in a car, and is essentially sedentary for most of the day?
The biological reality is stark, and it's why we have an obesity epidemic. If you are sedentary, you have absolutely zero biological need for dietary carbohydrates. None.
None at all.
Because you aren't moving, your large muscle sump, that hazardous waste bin, is already completely full.
So when we eat a bowl of oatmeal or a piece of bread for breakfast,
There is nowhere for that glucose to go. The bin is full. So your body is forced to convert it immediately into fat, particularly dangerous liver fat.
geez.
That is what drives chronic insulin resistance. You are overflowing a full tank at every single meal.
Which brings us to the hardest part of this entire discussion, right? Application.
Mm.
Hearing all this science is one thing, but giving up carbs in a society built entirely around them is immensely isolating and difficult.
It is really tough.
If they are acting as a biological toxin, how do we actually stop eating them?
Yeah, you have to fundamentally reframe how you view them. You have to treat it as an addiction.
An addiction.
The research is very clear on this. Carbohydrates and sugar act on the brain much like highly addictive drugs. The concept of moderation simply does not work for someone who is already insulin resistant. Just as having, just one drink doesn't work for an alcoholic.
So it's not a willpower issue.
No. The intense cravings are your biggest hurdle, not a lack of discipline.
And Noakes doesn't pull any punches on what foods are keeping those cravings alive. He created a rating system, and a lot of everyday staples were rated 10 out of 10 bad for insulin-resistant people.
Oh, yeah, the worst of the worst.
Oatmeal, potatoes, brown rice, sourdough bread, bananas, all 10 out of 10 bad.
Yep.
But there's one on this list that genuinely surprised me. He gave stevia and monk fruit a 10 out of 10 bad rating.
Yes.
I have to ask, if they have 0 calories and they don't spike blood glucose, how are they biologically harming us?
This is where we have to separate metabolic impact from psychological addiction.
Yeah.
Yes, stevia won't trigger the bouncer at the nightclub the way real sugar does.
Right.
But the intensely sweet taste lights up the exact same dopamine neural pathways in your brain.
Oh, wow.
Keeping that sweet taste alive keeps the neurological addiction firing. It guarantees that you will constantly be fighting cravings, which almost always leads to a relapse for the real thing.
So it's about a neurological reboot.
Exactly. To truly heal, you have to retrain your palate away from sweetness entirely. You have to break the cycle in the brain, not just the gut.
I mean, I know that sounds daunting, but framing it as freeing yourself from constant exhausting cravings makes a lot of sense. So what can we eat?
Well, the research outlines a green list of foods. This is your safe zone.
Okay, what's on it?
Meat, especially fatty meats, biltong, turkey eggs, cheese, full-fat dairy, and the occasional handful of nuts. And yes, a few blueberries are acceptable.
And the metric for success on this list is incredible. The data mentions a man in Cape Town who lost 80 kilograms, that's about 160 pounds, in just 28 weeks, simply by sticking strictly to this green list.
That is life-changing. But the true internal goal, the real measure of health, is getting your fasting insulin below 5 or 6 units.
Below 5 or 6.
Yeah. That is the threshold where you become truly fat-adapted. That is when your body unlocks its own fat stores for energy, and those exhausting cravings finally disappear.
It's an incredible transformation. But before we wrap this up, if the science on carbohydrates is this upside down, we have to address the massive elephant in the room: cholesterol.
Right.
If we're eating all this meat, cheese, and saturated fat, aren't we just going to clog our arteries and die of a heart attack?
According to the clinical data we reviewed, the diet heart hypothesis, the idea that dietary saturated fat raises cholesterol, which then causes heart attacks, is fundamentally false.
It's a huge claim to say the cornerstone of modern cardiology is false.
It is, but the data is hiding in plain sight. Look at the Women's Health Initiative. This was a massive $700 million study.
Huge.
The research reveals that the scientists actually hid data showing that for postmenopausal women with existing heart disease, adopting a low-fat, high-carb diet increased their risk of a cardiac event by 69%.
The 69% increase in risk, and it was hidden.
Yes, because it completely contradicted the established industry-backed model. And this willful blindness extends to how we treat cholesterol today with statin drugs.
How so?
The data points out that taking statins does not actually lower your coronary artery calcium score.
And just to clarify, the CAC score is the measure of actual physical plaque calcifying in your arteries, right?
Yeah, it's the actual disease progression. In fact, statins might actively increase that calcification.
That's terrifying.
Noakes argues we need a total paradigm shift. We must stop worrying about total cholesterol, which is a poor predictor of mortality, and start measuring our CAC scores and our fasting insulin. That is where the real predictive danger lies.
So, to summarize the sheer scale of what we've unpacked today, humans are evolutionarily engineered to run on fat. The shift to a grain-based diet in the 70s was driven by industry lobbying, not human biology.
Right.
Carbohydrates drive insulin resistance, which acts as the root cause of our modern chronic disease epidemic. And finally, fixing this isn't about shaming yourself over calorie counts. It requires a total dietary reset to break a biochemical addiction to sugar.
It's a lot to process, and it challenges almost everything we've been taught. But I want to leave you with one final provocative thought to mull over.
I'd love to hear it.
If our bodies treat excess carbohydrates, essentially, as a toxic spill, that must be aggressively sumped away into our muscles and fat cells just to protect our bloodstream.
Right.
How might this change your perspective on the psychological triggers that make you crave those very foods the most during times of stress?
Oh, wow.
Are we, as a society, simply self-medicating our anxiety with a biological toxin?
That's a profound and vital question to walk away with. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.
Yeah.
Hopefully it helps you rethink the fuel you're putting into the engine. Catch you next time.